Peter Rodriguez.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Brad, and thank you, everyone. I don't know if anyone had mentioned that Princeton Review ranked our entrepreneurship program, or Rice, number 3 in the nation today in entrepreneurship. But this is great thanks to Yale, who I don't see right there, but I did a moment ago, and you, Brad, and everyone here, and Jack, and everyone. So thank you very much, and thank you to everyone here. This is clearly a fantastic panel to convene. I can't tell you how special it is, but also just the folks in the crowd here. Thank you for coming and being a part of this terrific conversation. It means a lot to us. I think the first thing I did as dean is I just had a sign on my door that said, "Yes, Jack," and that was pretty much the key to most of my success. Jack would come up, he'd ask a question, and he just got his yes, and I was safe. So thank you all for coming and convening on this terrific topic. If I could ask the panel to help me with introductions. So Reggie, could you start and tell them? I think everyone knows you, but if you could introduce yourself, we'll bring it this way.
My name is Reggie DeRoche. Is mine fine?
Yes.
Dean of the School of Engineering. I've been at Rice for a little bit over a year.
So you're still learning, right? You have a year to go before you have to know anything.
Still learning.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Allison Thacker. I'm the Chief Investment Officer for the Rice Endowment. So I'm a Rice alum, class of '96, and I've been here back at Rice for 7 years now. And I manage the $6.2 billion endowment, and that investment return hopefully funds approximately 40% of the budget at Rice.
Thank you.
Jim Tour, in chemistry, do chemistry and nanotechnology.
To say the least. But we've heard from Brian and Jack already. I think that I'll start by asking some questions of our new panelists, just so we can get going. Allison, I think I'll start with you, because I think in so many ways, the sort of big question in the room is, can Houston do this? Is this time really different? Is this something that's going to lead to the change we all aspire and hope to see? And this is a great leadership act by RMC. So I wonder if you could say a little bit about how did you get comfortable with this somewhat atypical and sizable investment?
So it is true, this is an atypical investment for the endowment, and I think David and I have talked a lot about this. It's a very unusual investment where it both offers the endowment fantastic long-term returns, but also allows the university to make major progress along its vision for engaging and empowering Houston and its success. And so this has been an interesting project for me. My team is usually working largely in isolation and focused on investment projects kind of globally, and so this is a project very close to home, and many of my colleagues have supported us so much, and that we will continue to need that. So thank you to you all. I'm sure you're tired of hearing from me as well. So how did we get comfortable with this? I think there were a couple of parts of this, and I just want to tell you, venture capital is a long-term investment asset class for the Rice Endowment. We have almost $600 million of the endowment invested in venture capital today.
I didn't know that.
The endowment over the last 20 years has returned 8.2%. The venture capital portfolio has returned 20.01%. So as a 20 sounded too inexact to me. I was like, really the number? It's really the number.
This is right.
So it is one of the top performing asset classes along with oil and gas investments for the endowment. So we know that venture capital can drive tremendous outcomes for investors and for cities. I spent 11 years of my career before coming here in Silicon Valley. And so when I look at Houston, it's frustrating because I think we're a very entrepreneurial city, and I think there's a lot of energy around this topic. I think the not being selected by Amazon a year ago as one of the contenders was a big wake-up call for our city. And so one of the things that's been so heartening about this project is I think this location is great, I think the project is great, but I also have never seen a project that has this much united support from both our other educational institutions in town, civic leaders at the county and city level, as well as business leaders. So I'm very optimistic, but I also think it's going to take all of us to change some of these rankings and perceptions of Houston as an entrepreneurial destination.
Well, it sounds like the move you made is a big step in that direction, so thank you for your leadership, and David, thank you for yours. This is an enormous opportunity for all of us. Jim, if I could ask you, I think you hold a unique position as an outstanding, scientist and inventor and someone whose capabilities can really influence dozens of industries, how do you assess Houston in this ecosystem? What are the key gaps for someone who can do what you do in taking us to the next level? Do you think we have a great chance of filling those gaps, or do you think they're more sizable than some of us recognize from a scientist's perspective?
Well, being a chemist, I love chemistry, and I think it's certainly possible. And I'll tell you specifically how. Jack, who I admire a great deal, you talked about renewable energies versus oil and gas. You said oil and gas won't be here forever, and I agree, not forever. Forever is a long time. But certainly the next 100 years, and I'll tell you how, with no CO2 evolution. So we do oil and gas with no CO2 evolution. You can take methane, you can convert it to carbon, solid, and hydrogen, H2. And then you take H2, you mix it with water and a fuel cell, mix it with oxygen and fuel cell, you get water. That combination is 400 kilojoules per mole of energy released. Combustion is 800 kilojoules of energy per mole. So you get half the energy out. However, we have so much natural gas, we just flare it. We get half the energy out, no CO2 evolution. The fuel cell is 80% efficient. A car is 25% efficient around town, about 60% efficient on the highway. And then you also have that carbon solid. And if we can take that carbon solid and put it into products that allow us to use less concrete, less steel, less aluminum, less plastic because of the strength that we get from the high carbon value material. So it's really about chemistry, and I don't discount this at all. And I really think that we can pull these things off here in this city, that oil and gas, we can make energy from oil, from methane, make energy from methane with no CO2 evolution, and use that carbon solid to enhance our other products that are generating lots of CO2 and making concrete and aluminum and steel, and really enhancing in that way. So I think chemistry can solve a lot of these answers, and that's actually what we're doing.
Well, if I had any extra money, I'd give it to you. That was a fantastic. But on the, I wanted to add one more thing. This is a really optimistic tone for a place like Houston, that you can say that this evolution we need to go through, we're well positioned for it in many ways. It's a matter of making it real, but this could be the place that is as important as we hope it will be.
It will happen.
It will happen.
Yes.
Jack, you wanted to add?
I was just going to add, Jim, I agree with everything you said as a chemist, and that's solid technological thinking. But there's a political side not reflected in that. And so the state of California, for example, has now passed laws that says we will outlaw all combustion vehicles on the highway in California by as early as 2040. That's a mere 22 years away. Now, whether that happens or not at that short timetable is one thing, but clearly you can't argue with the political process, because there are a lot of people who feel that it's just the wrong side to be on, to put CO2 in the air, and it'll take
There's no CO2. What I'm talking about is no CO2 emission, but you get the energy out. So I'm okay with cars going away in 25 years. I'm okay with that, because we can do that without any CO2 emission. Then it works out.
But that requires junking all hardware we have today and starting with all new hardware.
Yeah, California takes the lead on that. The other ones, but I really think it can happen actually in the next few years. Really can. I have a battery company. I love alternative energies. Lots of patents in electrocatalysis, in batteries, in fuel cells, in water splitting. I have all that. So I know those areas, I know what they can deliver, and I know what God's gift to humanity is hydrocarbon, and you can do that and use it for energy without CO2 emission.
Instead of making plastics.
Yeah, you don't have to make plastics out of it either.
Fantastic. Well, this is off to a good start. That's fantastic. I just, as a business person, I want to say, if I make the T-shirt that says God gives to energy to humanity's hydrocarbons, I'm going to make the most profit off of this particular. But what I want to turn to is to you, Reggie. So and you have great experience from Georgia Tech, a similar city in some ways, Atlanta, that has some some of the same challenges as Houston does and wants to be on the edge of transformation. When you think about the gaps we have pedagogically or from an academic standpoint, what do you think we need to do at Rice, but even in Houston, to educate a generation of leaders to take advantage of the opportunity before us and help make Houston into the city we hope it will be?
So yes, I was at Tech right when they started their new town, Tech Square, which is actually adjacent to campus. I just started, so about 20 years ago, and I saw the transformation that had on not just the university, Georgia Tech, but also the city of Atlanta. And so you saw the list that Jack put up there. Atlanta's third in innovation, and there's no doubt in my mind it's all to do with that space and what it did for the faculty, what it did for the city and companies. Now they have a dozen or so companies that have innovation spaces in there. And it really created this culture, I think, in Atlanta that wasn't there before that in terms of the ability for faculty to work in a fashion and create companies and entrepreneurship. And so I think the opportunity in Houston is even greater for a number of reasons. The number of companies that are here, the different universities we have here. So I really think this is an opportunity that we need to seize upon. And I think the opportunity here is greater than many other cities.
So, and what sort of learning opportunities do you think we need to create for engineers in particular that will help feed this transition or lead them into entrepreneurship or the types of companies we hope to form here?
So Jack talked about the entrepreneurship education, which I think is absolutely important. I know we do a great job in Yale side here. I think we need to teach our students and our faculty really about value creation. It's really about creating value in terms of the research that we're doing. And so I think we need to create the type of infrastructure where we do DoD research. You didn't talk about SRI, Jack, but I was hoping you'd talk a little bit about SRI, because I think there's an analogy here to what SRI did in Silicon Valley to what we can do here in Houston in terms of creating this infrastructure for our faculty to work on the type of research that's really transformational and translational that we currently don't have right now. So I think the opportunity is just tremendous.
I think that gives me a segue into a topic that I wanted to ask, and maybe in particular Brian and Jim and Jack, because it makes sense for you, was this age-old question in business schools and elsewhere, which is, are entrepreneurs really born or made? And so can we take what we have and make them into the types of leaders that we need to lead the city to the next century or lead it throughout the century and help it flourish? Or do we need to change something that we're doing? Is this something that is possible here? If so, what do we need to do that we haven't? Jim, were you always of a mindset of someone who could create a company and do the original science, or is that something that had to be presented to you in a particular way? Was it something in your mind from the beginning, or did someone bring it?
Well, this is my 30th year, so I started 30 years ago, and I think it was 29 years ago that I filed my first patent. And so I was always actually when I was a student a postdoc at Stanford is when I filed my first patent, independent of my advisor, who thought it was crazy. I went over to the patent office and got one of these brochures on how to do it. So I was always doing that. But if a young faculty member in the sciences would give me their ear, I could really teach them how to pull this off. There was Aydin Babakahani came and spoke with me, and I introduced him to the oil industry, and he attended a couple of the meetings, and boom, he was off and running. So I have more trouble with some of the older faculty that have never learned in this, but I think the younger faculty are willing to do this, and I'm willing to help them if they're interested in learning how to do this. And I fund a lot of the research in my group through this, and it's blackmail. I say, look, you want to license this technology, you got to fund my group at $250,000 a year for at least 2 years. And they say, we can't do that. I say, okay, we're not going to license it to you. And I get the money. And I fund my work that way. And so it is a way to bring in research dollars into the university, and we're parlaying that more recently into what's going to be a much bigger number. So I think the future of research to depend on the federal government is great, but it's not going to always hold up. And so we have to have innovative ways of funding our academic research. You say, well, that's all applied, you can't do it. No, I do lots of fundamental research, and I tell them I'll be exploring in these domains. And that's it. And I do a lot of fundamental research, and we do a little bit of applied, and that was just the cost of entry. And they pay it. So I think that there's ways that we can really benefit the university through this, but and I'm willing to teach this, but it's not a traditional way.
I see. Brian?
Yeah, look, I know a lot of guys in the Bay Area and all the big tech companies, and Rice has a lot of the characteristics that Stanford has. We have great research, tons of brilliant faculty. You need business guys. And entrepreneurism, I do not, there are always born entrepreneurs, but very few of the great entrepreneurs were just born, they learned it. And you can learn it, you can teach it. I think that's what Jack is saying is important. It needs to be taught. And we need the culture, we need to put the two together. We need to put all the scientists together with the business folks. I mean, I'm in the Goose Group also. We do a lot of investments, and I will tell you, a large majority of the companies that are started by PhDs with a great technology who are the CEOs, they struggle because they kind of get lost on how to get it to market, how to make it happen. Team those up with great business people from the Jones School, and I think everybody will be better off.
Well, I see Professor Hallis actually. I can tell that you have this on your mind. Is Brian preaching to the choir with you? Is he?
So if I could just briefly say something. So I would love to comment about, I remember Steve Corral, and I love the development of the Rice Business Plan competition. I love it, but it's actually, as this has evolved and matured, if you're missing a golden opportunity, Steve also started something called an Inventors Forum, and where basically inventors, faculty members with a good idea would get up in front of a bunch of people, pre-business plan, okay, to meet the really early stage people. I was one of the speakers at the first Rice Inventors Forum, along with Rick Smalley and Rich Barron. And with those in that one meeting, we all were able to start companies.
What year was that, Naomi?
2000.
Really early.
So it was very early, and I think the Rice Business Plan competition sort of spun off from that, but because of the nature of that, you already have a management team in place, you already have a business plan, because you're competing business plans. But what about the entrepreneur before the business plan, when the idea is just there, but it has to have that shaping, it has to have that refinement that you get when you really get the inventor right next to somebody who has the business sense and the business experience. Right now, I don't think that Rice is doing that, and I think it would be a real game changer if we were to reestablish that kind of form.
I think when I listened to a lot of the things you mentioned, Jack, it sounds like you were describing the elements that create that environment in which those great serendipitous, but also somewhat deliberate accommodations take place. I'm sorry, Brian, you were going to add something.
Look, I was just going to add one thing. People look at innovation a different way. You talk to one group and they'll think innovation is scientists coming up with a great idea and somebody figures out how to take it to market. A lot of the companies I've talked to have changed their model completely. They go out and talk to the market, they find the pain points, they know that there's some technology that can solve the problem, and now they're going back to the universities, engaging folks like you, and saying, I have this specific problem, I heard a little bit about this technology, do you think you can help me solve that problem? Mm-hmm. And there is a lot of great technology that's getting developed that way. Mm-hmm. So there's not just one model, but I do think you need both sides. You need the technologists and you need the business folks to make it to optimize it.
It's always interesting because it sounds like we have all the ingredients but not quite the recipe, and maybe what we're working on is getting the recipe to mix all these ingredients in the right way. I thought I would ask the panel, and maybe everybody has a different idea about this, but I feel as if we're at the beginning of something, genuinely at the beginning. If we looked forward 3-4 years, what do you think would be some great markers of success for what we're doing now? What would be evident in the ecosystem or in the Midtown Innovation District or at Rice University that would signal that we were really making progress? What are the things that would show us we were really taking steps forward and achieving the results we want?
It's a 5-letter word. Could be 4-letter word. It's called exits. The biggest thing to get attention on the national stage, a big-time player in this space, is companies going public or getting acquired, creating great awards for founders and investors, and a chance to recycle that money and those players into more of same. So exits is, I think, the central biggest metric.
That's what gets seen, that's what gets noticed, and that's what would signal that Houston was really making a change. Okay, I like it. Exits.
To me, if we're recognized as being a culture of innovation, you think about Rice, engineering, and science, if you think innovation, to me, that means we move on.
Okay. Do you think we have a marketing problem?
I think
I'm asking the Dean of Engineering, but yes.
I think part of it's a marketing problem. Part of it is I don't think the infrastructure is really there. I mean, to build on what Jim said, right now when you're hiring faculty, it used to be hiring faculty that are concerned about quality graduate students,
Right.
lab space. Then now they want to know, can I bring my company here? Can I start a company here? So that's going to be absolutely important as if we want to continue to hire superstars in engineering science.
Jim?
I think for Houston that really makes us unique is the oil and gas industry. And I really think we can play off this thing and make energy that really has no CO2 emission, that is clean. And because if you just look at the thermodynamic numbers, I mean, it's just clear. You look at the thermodynamics, there's so much energy that's stored in a molecule of hydrocarbon. Just look at the thermodynamics. It's hard for anything to get close to that. And so we have a lot of room to play here and really capitalize on this, and the world would super take notice of this. And so, and the other thing, since I have the dean of the business school here, my dealings with the young MBAs that are coming out of Rice is that I think that they need the ability to make a deal better with people. I've just teed stuff up for them and see them blow it. And I'm like, how did that happen? These guys wanted to do a deal. And they said, well, you know, it was going to cost $2,500 to ship this to China. I'll pay for it. What's the big deal? Make this thing happen. And so if you could get them into these real life scenarios where they got to make a deal somehow, I think that would help.
That's what all these guys are for. Anthony,
We're going to meet right after
Larry,
this, Jim.
David.
We're going to fix your problem. Thank you. Allison, for the Innovation District, can you think of great markers of success?
Mine's so much more pragmatic, I guess. It's going to sound boring. No, we want to open the renovated Midtown hub in this former Sears building. We want to open it full at the end of 2020. And
2 years from today.
2 years from today, and we want to have 2 more buildings under construction on adjacent parcels in that area. And the only way that'll happen is if there's developer demand and tenant demand, and Houston needs an anchor tech tenant. I am very focused on that. I completely agree with Jack and Brian. It's critical. We need to tell someone, yeah, it's great, California is going to ban combustion vehicles. You cannot afford to live there. They are going to make choices that mean they cannot have the majority of their employees in California. So what is an alternative? We must be one of those alternatives. Those are jobs we need as a city, and so we have to find an entree over the next couple of years into one of those players and get them to choose Houston.
That means that the next 2 years could be really special. If we did those things, that would be fantastic.
I'm going to give a qualitative answer. When I met David the first time 4 years ago, I asked him, what were your priorities? One of his top 4 was to create an entrepreneurial DNA in the Rice community. And the qualitative answer is, if in 4 years, everybody's singing off the same song sheet, everybody believes it. And I've seen this happen a couple of times, is when everybody gets together and starts believing it and pulling the train in the same direction, it's a virtuous cycle and just good things happen. You can't really predict it. It's all in this room. I think there's a lot of people that believe. I think there's a few doubters still, if I can see it in some people's eyes. And I think we're going the right direction. And I think you guys, I think David's put, and you have put, most of the building blocks are in place. It's just almost there. And now it's got to come together, and we've got to work together to make this happen.
Well, I agree, and I think that a lot of people in the audience agree. And maybe we have time for a few questions, Paul, maybe from folks, if you'd like to ask anything, if you could just raise your hand. And I'm not sure, we might be out of microphones, so you may have to use your projection voices. So.
He's got roving mics. Yeah.
Hi, Emily Evans. I just got my PhD from Rice, and now I'm in the entrepreneurial space. My question is it easier to teach business principles to scientists or science to business students?
Jack, maybe you should take that one.
That's something I've researched and lived through. When I got to Silicon Valley as a young scientist, I had never been in a business class in my life, never sat in a business classroom. I knew nothing about business, okay? PhD science curriculums don't allow any time to go take those kind of courses historically. But the next 5 years of my life, I lived through what I earlier said, MBA from the School of Hard Knocks. Those lessons are very painful, but they have great redeeming and lasting values that you learn. Then I learned that I was not the only one. You know, if I looked at Silicon Valley heavy hitter achievers and company founders, there was one group called college dropouts, you know, like Michael Dell and Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Larry Ellison and endless others like them. So they didn't seem to need all that education. They were innately, naturally, strongly entrepreneurially driven. Then there were people like Gordon Moore and Robert Noyce, PhD scientists, engineers who founded Intel, and a bunch more like them. But in between, all were mostly scientists, engineers. Almost none of them ever had business class in their life. So that's what I meant when we need more entrepreneur education. Stanford recognized that big gap, jumped on it big time, drafted endless numbers of us to adjuncts and professors of the practice to come teach courses and do all kind of things. And that became the real first feeding aspect of Stanford's role. So I'm a huge champion for that, Peter.
For my own short answer, I would just say I think it's easier to teach them to work together. Even when they don't and they have failures, it ought to be easier to have to help them figure out what they can each specialize in and do well. We don't do that well enough, but I think that's fine. Anyone else on the panel want to respond?
I don't think the business guys need to understand the technology. They just need to understand what it can do. And I think that you need to get them working together.
We have another question here. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Hello, my name is Eduardo Ramirez Salinas. I am a second year MBA student here at Rice University. Earlier, Peter, you asked how success will look like in 3 years from now. And one of the things I wonder, provided I had the opportunity to be in that trip where we combined PhD students from Rice with MBA from Rice with the UC Davis people to experience this Silicon Valley spirit. One thing that comes to my mind is the talent. So if there is a higher demand for talent in Houston area, that means that something is working fine. Do you all believe that increasing, for example, demand for MBA spots at Rice or University of Houston or Texas A&M will be an indicator as well of big success? And what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I can answer from my perspective, which is that one of the things we focus a lot on is getting the right people. So it's not just volume, but really having first pick. It's like playground dodgeball. I said you always want first pick, and if you're getting first pick, something's going really right. And so there's a bit of a chicken and egg issue with that. But overall, I think landing an anchor tenant would add a lot to demand, and those processes really feed on themselves. And if there's something that would make a big change, it would be that shift in the ecosystem where we were drawing in more people who needed the right skills. And if we were deficient in a skill, I think we could figure that out quickly, but I think that's what we need most. Brandon, I have a question.
Yeah, you can hear me?
Yep.
Great. I'm not an alumnus of Rice. I don't even live in Houston, but I come here a lot to associate with a lot of you folks. Here's the question. At universities I've been working with around the country who are thinking about entrepreneurship and all of that, one of the complaints I hear all the time is that, for a professor to become tenured, they don't care if I have patents, they don't care if I make companies, they care if I publish, they care if I have a lot of grants. Is that something here that is an issue or not?
I'm going to hand this question to my boss, Provost of the University of Maryland.
I think universities are, understand that the promotion and tenure process is always evolving. The things that were getting you tenure 50 years ago won't get you tenure today, and it's not just the bar is going up, the bar is moving around to different directions. So I think universities need some help figuring out in the promotion and tenure process, how do you take into consideration these different kinds of metrics, like were patents filed, were things licensed, are there successful businesses that were spun off, are people coming and wanting to engage with this faculty person because of their creative ideas. And what we see in the P&T process at Rice now, at least, I still think we have some ways to go for our science and engineering faculty, and Reggie's a good person to comment on this as well, is an increased attention to these other metrics of scientific and engineering productivity. Things like, licensing patents and all those sorts of things. It's an evolving art for us in the promotion and tenure process, but we certainly understand that our students want to work with faculty who have those capabilities. They're coming here saying, I want to learn not just the underlying science or engineering, I want to learn how to take that out into the world. So our students are wanting that in the faculty. The newest and brightest faculty who we want to attract are wanting to be able to spend some of their time that way and want that to be part of the reward structure. We're also finding that it creates a really exciting and dynamic culture and environment on campus, which actually turns out to be really good for your publications and your federal grantsmanship and your corporate grantsmanship. So they're not necessarily, dichotomous, one or the other. There's this just really rich environment that gets created that makes all kinds of things happen. I'll point to Professor Hallis and Professor Tour, for example, who are great entrepreneurs, push things out on a regular basis, but are also highly successful in their grantsmanship and are very well published. I feel like every other day I read a Rice news release about one or the other of them, about some great paper that they have in one of the top journals. So I think it's important for the P&T process to adjust. I also think it's important to remember that this is not an either-or situation. We should decide that at Rice we get to say yes and.
Let me just quickly add, we just went through the process where the chairs meet and review the cases. We had nearly 10 cases. 3 of them had faculty that started companies, and we discussed in detail the impact those companies have had and how important it is as part of their overall scope of what they did. So I think this is a change from 10, even 5 years ago. I think we absolutely value that.
So I think we have time for another question.
Okay, so I've got to me this is the elephant in the room, and it may be to Naomi. I'm sure it is to a couple of other people in this room. So I've got to ask it. It's maybe a bit controversial, but as you can see from Jack's slide of all the people in Goose, it's not very gender diverse. And I'm one of the few female angel investors that I've met in Houston. And this question is actually going to be directed to you, Allison. I guess the question is, do you try to intentionally find entrepreneurs that are diverse? And why do you think that it's so difficult to find female angel investors, and why are so? I mean, we're half the population. We're in the workforce. We have our own funds. What is it about us that is preventing us from getting into this game or getting into the action, which I find fascinating? Or is it that we're being left out? I mean, today we saw presentations from 8 different companies, all male. The entire leadership team was male, and the boards were all male. And I'm not trying to, that's unusual. I mean, I don't think that happens that often. But I don't know if anybody else in the room recognized that in the room that I was in. So I just wanted to, you probably all have thoughts on this, so I'm opening it up. But.
Well, I did just tell Brian when I saw the Goose Society picture, I said, you need some more women.
And what did I say?
And he said he had 3 candidates that they had just talked to. So I was glad. But I expect to see progress. No, I'm kidding. Everything that I do in financial services looks like this. So this is not exclusive to the angel sector. It is a depressing fact. So we make significant effort within our office to hire diverse people across all sorts of spectrums of diversity. It is a #1 question I ask investment managers. Why don't you have a diverse team? It's awesome how many of them like to argue with me about that. Because it's just facts, but it's interesting. They're very offended by it often. I think they're making a little progress in general. I will say that I think exits is a really important point that Jack made, which is We need to have female entrepreneurs start businesses, exit, and have their own wealth that then they control and are able to redeploy. It's very important to start that cycle, and so we're at a depressing place today, and I would say everyone in this room should take it on to say, it is part of my job in encouraging the entrepreneurial activity in this community to reach out to underrepresented minority founders, women founders, et cetera, and to try to bring them more into this circle. This is one of the ambitions for the Midtown Innovation District, is that this is a very diverse city, Houston is. We could actually have a key advantage in this area, and so we have reached out a lot to community organizations in this city to say, how do we make it better in Houston? Because it's not been great other places, so how could we do it better? So I'd love to talk to you more.
Leslie, you sound exactly like my one and only daughter. And I just met you today, this morning for the first time. Our daughter Jennifer was with 3 sons and a daughter, as life would have it. Boys are all over the map trying to figure out who's on first and what's the role of girls in my life and math and this and that. Girls don't have that hang up. And she went to MIT and Stanford, 2 engineering degrees plus MBA. And when she came to Stanford, she said, "Dad, introduce me to some powerhouse women, icon founders of the past." Well, we didn't have a lot of them. And I did the best I could. I rounded up 2 or 3 just to have somebody to talk to. She came back to me and she said, "Dad, these are not very good role models." They said they're women you greatly admire for their accomplishments, but they're all pissed off at the male chauvinist world. I said, "Well, look, why don't you do something about that?" So she founded an organization called Stanford Women's Entrepreneurial Alliance. Well, that was just a club for female MBA students. When she graduated, Dean Michael Spence, who's a Nobel economist, called her to his office and explained to her, the time has come for women to play a much bigger role, and we want to lead the way, and your organization is great. Why don't you go out and refound that, but drop the name Stanford so it'll appeal more broadly. So the new name was Forum of Women Entrepreneurs. That organization grew from startup to tens of thousands of members over multiple cities. Stanford then made it a required case study for all MBA students. So we were very proud of her for that achievement. But I think today's world is very different. And Brian and I certainly welcome, we want to meet more female members. Out of 25, we have 1, Dr. Nancy Chang. And we'd like to have more, because I think that's the new era, the mantra for the new era.
Well, I just want to say, Leslie, I think you're right. It is a big issue. It's something we face all the time. It used to be the case that at top MBA programs, people said if we could ever get to 40% women in the program, we'd be really hitting the right mark. Today, you're seeing a couple of them hit 50, which makes a lot of sense. I think 55% of all undergraduate Phi Beta Kappa are women. So it should work out that way, but we've got a lot to learn. We had Sheryl Sandberg right here last spring. She came with her 2 daughters, and she said she was really optimistic about the future, but we were really slow learners in business schools, and I think that was fair and that was right. So I think we're making a lot of progress, but the gap is really there, and it's in a lot of areas, but I think you make an important point. So I think I'm getting the high sign that we're about out of time, and so I want to thank everybody, and particularly the panel, for all that they have done to contribute to this great moment in Houston's future and in Rice's future. And I want to invite all of you to the Anderson Family Commons for this session. So thank you all very much.